But even as she celebrated this success, she knew that greater challenges lay ahead, because Queen Zaretha had announced that she would be visiting Earth in 2 months' time, and she would be the first Valkyrian monarch ever to set foot on humanity's homeworld, and the pressure to make everything perfect was enormous, and the potential for cultural misunderstandings was higher than ever. Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Dawn, Jack Murphy was having his own revelations, and Master Kelvon had taken him on as a formal apprentice and was teaching him not just the technical aspects of Valkyrian technology, but the philosophy behind it. And Jack was learning that for the Valkyrians, technology was not separate from spirituality or art, because it was all one integrated whole. Kelvon explained one day as they worked on a complex energy matrix that human people saw the universe as something to be conquered and understood through force of will, but that Valkyrians saw it as something to be partnered with and to be understood through harmony and resonance. Jack observed that both approaches worked and that humanity had made incredible technological progress. With their methods, Kelvon agreed and said that was why this exchange was so valuable. And he asked Jack to imagine what could be achieved by combining their philosophies and by learning to balance human drive and determination with Valkyrian harmony and patience. Jack paused in his work, struck by a sudden realization, and he said that was what the Queen was really testing, and asked if it was not just whether they could work together, but whether they could truly integrate their approaches into something new and better. Kelvon's eyes crinkled in what Jack had learned to recognize as a Valkyrian smile, and he told Jack that he was wiser than he knew, and that yes, that was precisely what she hoped to discover. And he explained that the question was not whether humans and Valkyrians could coexist, but whether they could create something greater together than either of them could achieve alone. That night, Jack sent a detailed report back to the Horizon, sharing his insights and the technical knowledge he had gained, but he also included a more personal note expressing his growing conviction that this exchange program was about far more than just technology or diplomacy, and that it was about the very future of both species. Daniel read Jack's report with great interest because the young technician, who had nearly caused an interstellar incident, had matured considerably in just a few weeks. But Daniel also felt the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on his shoulders, and Queen Zaretha's visit to Earth was rapidly approaching, and he knew that it would be the ultimate test of everything they had learned about working together. He looked out at the stars, wondering what challenges and opportunities the next phase of human-Valkyrian relations would bring. And one thing was certain, which was that nothing would ever be the same again. 3 weeks had passed since Jack's trial in the armory, and the relationship between humans and Valkyrians had evolved in ways no one had predicted, and Queen Zaretha had not only agreed to the exchange program, but had expanded it far beyond what Daniel had initially proposed. The ESS Horizon now hosted a delegation of 12 Valkyrian scientists and engineers and cultural specialists, while an equivalent number of humans had been invited to live and work aboard the Valkyrian flagship called the Eternal Dawn, and Jack Murphy was among them, and he now served as the primary human liaison for technological cooperation. Katie Brooks stood in the Horizon's main laboratory, watching as a Valkyrian engineer named Soren demonstrated their quantum communication technology to a group of fascinated human scientists, and Soren's crystalline skin, flickered with colors that Katie had learned, indicated excitement and enthusiasm. Soren explained that the key was not to fight the quantum entanglement, and that they must work with it and guide it rather than control it, and he told them that their species tried too hard to dominate the technology and that they should learn to partner with it. Instead, Dr. Helen Carter, who was the Horizon's chief physicist, nodded thoughtfully and said it was a completely different philosophical approach, and admitted they had been thinking about quantum mechanics all wrong. Katie smiled at the exchange because this was happening all over the ship with Valkyrians and humans learning from each other and discovering that their different perspectives often complemented rather than contradicted each other. But not everything was going smoothly. Her communicator chirped, and it was Daniel telling her he needed her in conference room 3 because they had a situation. She found Daniel standing with Gregory and a Valkyrian cultural officer named Thera, and the tension in the room was palpable. Katie asked what was wrong. Thera spoke first, as her usual calm demeanor was slightly ruffled, and she explained that one of their crew members named Lisa Morgan had been invited to attend a Valkyrian bonding ceremony, and that she had accepted, But Thera feared she did not fully understand the significance. Gregory looked worried and explained that a bonding ceremony was their equivalent of a wedding, but that it was much more than that because it was a psychic and spiritual union that was considered sacred, and he warned that if Lisa participated inappropriately, it could cause serious offense. Katie asked if they had talked to Lisa about this. Daniel said that was the problem because Lisa thought it was just a party and a chance to experience Valkyrian culture, and she did not understand that she was being asked to serve as a witness, which in Valkyrian tradition meant she was vouching for the compatibility of the couple with her own honor. Katie winced and asked if Lisa even knew the couple. Thera admitted barely and explained that the male named Jaren worked in their engineering section with Jack Murphy, and that he had become friendly with Lisa over their shared interest in stellar cartography. And when he mentioned his upcoming bonding, Lisa had expressed such genuine enthusiasm that he felt compelled to invite her, and she said that refusing her now would be an insult. But allowing her to participate without full understanding could be disastrous. Katie said firmly that they would educate her quickly and thoroughly, and asked when the ceremony was. Thera said it was tomorrow evening. Gregory noted that was not much time. Katie replied that they had better get started then. They found Lisa in the observation deck studying star charts with obvious fascination, and she was a young woman, barely 25, with an infectious enthusiasm for everything related to space exploration. Katie began gently and told Lisa they needed to talk about the bonding ceremony she had been invited to. Lisa looked up beaming and said it was exciting, and that she had never been to an alien wedding before, and she was thinking of wearing her dress uniform and asked if that would be appropriate. Over the next several hours, Katie and Gregory and Thera gave Lisa an intensive course in Valkyrian bonding traditions, and they explained the significance of the witness role and the spiritual implications and the protocols she would need to follow. And to her credit, Lisa took it all seriously, once she understood the gravity of the situation. Lisa said she had no idea, and that she just thought Jaren was being friendly, and if she had known she was agreeing to something this important, she would have asked more questions. Gregory said that was the challenge of cross-cultural interaction, and explained that what seemed casual in one culture could be profound in another, but that she had accepted the invitation, and backing out now would hurt Jaren deeply. And he asked if she was willing to go through with it, understanding what it meant. Lisa thought for a moment and then nodded and said that Jaren had been nothing but kind to her, and if this was important to him, then yes, she would do it properly, and told them to teach her everything she needed to know. The following evening, the bonding ceremony took place in a specially prepared chamber aboard the Eternal Dawn, and Lisa wore traditional Valkyrian witness robes that Thera had helped her select, and she had spent the entire day practicing the rituals under Thera's patient guidance. The ceremony itself was beautiful and moving, even for those who did not fully understand all its nuances, and Jaren and his chosen partner, who was a Valkyrian female named Myris, stood in the center of a circle of light while their energies literally intertwined and created patterns of color that swirled through the air, and Lisa performed her role as witness perfectly, and spoke the ancient words that Thera had taught her, and stood in the precise position required by tradition. When it was over, Jaren approached Lisa with tears of joy in his luminescent eyes, and he thanked her in halting English, which was a language he had been studying specifically to communicate with his human colleagues, and he told her that she honored him and Myris with her presence and her respect for their ways. Lisa smiled deeply, moved, and thanked him for trusting her with something so important to him. Watching from the crowd, Katie felt a sense of pride because this was what true cultural exchange looked like, and it was not just sharing technology or information, but opening hearts and minds to new ways of being. The guest quarters were luxurious by any standard, but they felt like a prison cell to the anxious humans, and Jack sat on the edge of an alien bed with his head in his hands, while the others tried to process what had just happened. Jack said he was sorry for what felt like the 100th time, and he told them he did not think, and that he just saw that armor and had to know how it worked, and he admitted that he had ruined everything. Katie placed a hand on his shoulder and told him that what was done, and that now they needed to focus on getting him through tomorrow's test. Daniel paced the room as his military mind analyzed their situation, and he asked Jack to tell him honestly if he had any idea what he was up against. and whether he could actually work with alien technology he had never seen before. Jack looked up, and despite his fear, there was a spark of determination in his eyes, and he told the captain that he had been reverse engineering alien tech since the first Valkyrian probe entered their system 3 years ago, and he explained that he might not know their specific systems, but that engineering followed certain universal principles like energy flow and structural integrity and material resonance, and he said these things transcended culture. Gregory interjected that their armor was sacred, and that this was not just about technical skill, but about understanding something deeply cultural and religious to them, and he warned that one wrong move and Jack would be dead. Jack said firmly that he would not make a wrong move, and he acknowledged that he had screwed up by touching the armor without permission, but now that he had permission, and they were actually going to let him examine it properly, he was not going to waste this chance. The night passed slowly, and none of them could sleep much, and they spent hours discussing strategies and trying to prepare for every possibility, and Katie drilled Jack on protocol and etiquette, while Gregory shared everything he knew about Valkyrian culture from the briefing materials, and Daniel simply sat quietly, making contingency plans for scenarios ranging from successful completion to having to attempt a desperate rescue. When dawn came, or what passed for dawn on the station, Valkyrian guards arrived to collect Jack, and Daniel insisted on accompanying him, and to his surprise the guards agreed, and they were led through different corridors this time and descended deeper into the station's core. The armory was breathtaking, and it was a circular chamber with a domed ceiling that showed a projection of the stars outside, and in the center stood a raised platform, and around the walls hung hundreds of pieces of armor and weapons, and each one was a masterpiece. But the centerpiece was unmistakable because Queen Zaretha's armor was mounted on a display stand that elevated it above everything else. Zaretha herself was present, along with an elderly Valkyrian whose skin had faded to a pale silver color, and the elder's eyes were kind but sharp and missing nothing. Zaretha announced that this was Master Kelvon, and that he had served as the royal armorer for 300 years, and that he would observe Jack's work and judge his worthiness. Jack swallowed hard but stepped forward and told them he was honored, and thanked them for this opportunity. Kelvin's voice was surprisingly gentle as he told Jack to come and said they would see if his hands were as clever as his species claimed. The old master led Jack to the armor, and for the first time Jack could examine it properly, and up close it was even more remarkable because the metal seemed to shift and breathe, and when he held his scanner near it, the readings were unlike anything he had ever seen. Kelvon explained that the armor was alive in a sense, and that it was bonded to the Queen's life force and responded to her will and emotions, but that it required maintenance and calibration to prevent the bond from becoming unstable. Jack asked what would happen if the bond became unstable because his scientific curiosity was overcoming his nervousness. Kelvon said matter-of-factly that there would be a catastrophic energy discharge, and that both the armor and the wearer would be destroyed, and he explained that this was why the maintenance was so crucial, and why they allowed none but the most skilled to touch it. Jack nodded as his mind was already racing through the implications, and he said it was not just mechanical maintenance but more like medical care for a living system. Kelvon's eyes widened slightly, and he told Jack that he understood quickly, and that this was good, and that perhaps there was hope for him yet. For the next several hours, Kelvon guided Jack through the basics of the armor's functioning, and he showed him the energy conduits that ran through it like veins, and the crystalline nodes that stored and regulated power, and the consciousness interface that allowed it to respond to Zaretha's thoughts. And Jack absorbed everything like a sponge and asked questions and made connections, and saw patterns. Daniel watched from the side, amazed at how Jack seemed to transform, because gone was the nervous young man from last night, and in his place was a focused professional who was someone who understood machines at an intuitive level that transcended cultural boundaries. Kelvon said that now they came to the test itself, and he explained that one of the primary energy conduits had been deliberately destabilized, and that Jack must identify which one, and diagnose the problem and repair it without causing further damage. And he told Jack that he had 1 hour. Jack took a deep breath and approached the armor, and he closed his eyes for a moment to center himself and then opened them and began to work. He started with his scanner and took readings from multiple points, and then he set the scanner aside and simply used his hands and ran them along the armor's surface without actually touching it. and felt the energy patterns, and Daniel could see Zaretha watching intently with her expression unreadable. 30 minutes passed, and Jack had narrowed down the location to a specific section of the chest plate. But now came the delicate part, because he would have to actually manipulate the armor's internal systems, and one mistake could trigger the very catastrophe Kelvin had described. Jack said he needed to access the conduit directly, and asked if there was a specific tool he should use. Kelvin gestured to a table where various instruments were laid out and told him to choose wisely, because the wrong tool would disrupt the energy flow. Jack studied the tools and then selected one that looked like a tuning fork made of crystal, and he held it up questioningly, and Kelvin nodded, with what might have been approval. Carefully, Jack positioned the tool against the armor, and he struck it gently, and it began to vibrate with a clear, pure tone. And the armor responded as sections of it became transparent and revealed the intricate network of energy channels. Within, Zaretha murmured that it was remarkable, and that he had the resonance correct on his first attempt. Jack could now see the problem clearly, because one of the conduits had a microscopic fracture that was causing energy to leak and create an unstable feedback loop. But repairing it would require precision beyond anything he had ever attempted. He selected another tool that looked like a pen but emitted a beam of controlled energy, and taking a steadying breath, he began to work and used tiny pulses of energy to realign the crystalline structure of the conduit. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his hands remained perfectly steady despite the pressure, and the minutes ticked by and the room was silent, except for the soft hum of the armor and the occasional harmonic tone from Jack's tools. With 5 minutes remaining, Jack made the final adjustment, and the fracture sealed and the energy flow stabilized and the armor's glow returned to its normal even pattern, and he stepped back, exhausted but hopeful. Kelvin approached and ran his own scans, and he examined the repair from every angle and tested the energy flow and checked the bond stability, and finally he turned to Queen Zaretha and bowed. The year was 2247, and humanity had finally achieved what generations had dreamed of, which was contact with an advanced alien civilization, and the Valkyrian Empire had arrived at Earth's doorstep with their massive fleet hovering just beyond. The moon's orbit and their ships were magnificent and constructed from materials that seemed to bend light itself, creating an ethereal glow against the darkness of space. Captain Daniel Pierce stood on the bridge of the ESS Horizon, which was humanity's flagship vessel, as he prepared for the most important meeting in human history, and beside him stood his first officer, Lieutenant Katie Brooks, and their chief diplomat, Ambassador Gregory Hall, and the three of them had been chosen to represent Earth in this momentous occasion. Katie reported that they were receiving another transmission from the Valkyrian command ship, and her fingers danced across her console as she confirmed the meeting coordinates, and she announced that Queen Zaretha herself would be attending the meeting. Daniel felt his pulse quicken, because Queen Zaretha was the supreme ruler of the Valkyrian Empire, which was a civilization that spanned over 200 star systems, and according to the limited information they had gathered, she was both feared and revered throughout her domain, and she was a warrior queen who had united dozens of species under her banner. Daniel ordered Katie to send confirmation, and he made sure everyone knew the protocols, because they could not afford any mistakes, and the meeting was scheduled to take place aboard a neutral station that the Valkyrians had constructed specifically for this purpose. And as the Horizon docked, Daniel could not help but marvel at the craftsmanship, because every surface seemed to pulse with an inner light, and the air itself felt different and charged with some kind of energy he could not quite identify. They were escorted through gleaming corridors by Valkyrian guards who were tall beings, with crystalline skin that refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, and finally they entered a vast chamber where Queen Zaretha awaited them. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, and standing nearly 8 feet tall, her form was humanoid, but distinctly alien, with skin that shimmered like molten silver, and her eyes glowed with an inner fire, and atop her head rested a crown that seemed to be made of living energy. But what caught everyone's attention was her armor. The armor appeared to be a masterpiece of both art and technology, and it covered her torso and shoulders, and it was made from a metal that shifted colors from deep purple to brilliant gold, depending on the angle of light, and intricate patterns were carved into its surface telling stories in a language humans could not yet read, and the armor seemed to hum with power. As if it were alive, Zaretha's voice resonated through the chamber as her words were translated by devices implanted in their ears. And she welcomed the humans and told them they stood before the Valkyrian Empire, which was the guardians of order in this sector of the galaxy. Gregory stepped forward and bowed respectfully and told her that humanity was honored by her presence and that they extended their gratitude for this opportunity to establish peaceful relations. The negotiations began smoothly enough, and Zaretha was direct and surprisingly fair in her proposals, and she spoke of trade agreements and cultural exchanges and mutual defense pacts. And Daniel began to relax, thinking that perhaps this would be the beginning of a new golden age for humanity. Then Jack Murphy made his fateful mistake. Jack was a young technician who had been brought along to monitor the recording equipment, and he was brilliant but impulsive with a curiosity that often got him into trouble. And as the negotiations continued, he found himself drawn to Queen Zaretha's armor because he had never seen anything like it, and his engineer's mind was racing with questions about its composition and construction. While everyone's attention was focused on the diplomatic discussion, Jack quietly moved closer to where Zaretha stood, and he told himself he would just take a quick scan with his handheld analyzer and maybe get a few readings to study later, and he thought no one would even notice. He was wrong. The moment Jack's fingers brushed against the edge of Zaretha's armor, everything changed and the Queen's head snapped toward him with frightening speed, and her eyes blazed with fury, and the entire chamber seemed to shake, and a sound erupted from Zaretha that was part roar and part battle cry and entirely terrifying. Her voice thundered through the room, asking who touched. Her armor and every Valkyrian present immediately dropped to one knee, and the human delegation froze in shock and fear. And Jack stumbled backward with his face pale as he realized the magnitude of his error. Zaretha's armor began to glow brighter, with energy crackling across its surface, and her guards drew their weapons, which were advanced energy rifles that hummed ominously as they powered up, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and Daniel could see his own breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. Jack stammered that he did it, and his voice was barely above a whisper as he told her he did not mean any disrespect, and that he was just curious about the technology. The Queen's gaze fixed on him, and for a moment, Daniel was certain they were all about to die because her fury was palpable and rolling off her in waves that made the air itself feel heavy. Zaretha's voice was dangerously quiet now, as she asked if he dared to lay his primitive hands upon the sacred armor of the Valkyrian crown, and she demanded to know if he had any comprehension of what he had done. Gregory tried to intervene and pleaded with her that Jack meant no offense, and that their cultures were different, and he did not understand the significance of his action. Zaretha commanded silence, and her hand moved to her side where a weapon of some kind hung, and she explained that this armor had been worn by every ruler of the Valkyrian Empire for 10,000 years, and that it was sacred and blessed by the Ancient Ones and forged in the heart of a dying star. And she was outraged that this human had touched it as if it were a common trinket. Katie stepped forward because her military training overrode her fear, and she told the Queen that Jack's actions were unauthorized and foolish, but that they came from scientific curiosity and not malice. And she asked if such a misunderstanding had to end in bloodshed. Zaretha's eyes narrowed as she studied Katie, and for several long seconds the chamber remained silent, except for the ominous hum of charged weapons, and then unexpectedly the Queen's expression shifted slightly. She told Katie that she spoke with courage, but that courage alone did not erase an insult of this magnitude, and she turned her attention back to Jack and told him that in her empire, such an offense would demand immediate execution, and that his life was forfeit by their laws. Daniel's mind raced because they were on a Valkyrian station and surrounded by alien warriors with no backup and no way to fight their way out. But he could not let one of his crew die without trying everything possible to save him. Daniel stepped forward despite the weapons trained on him, and he addressed the Queen by telling her that she had demonstrated great wisdom in her negotiations that day, and that she had shown that the Valkyrian Empire valued justice and order, and he asked if true justice would not account for intent and ignorance, and he pointed out that Jack was guilty of stupidity and disrespect, but not of genuine malice, and he asked if there was no way this could be resolved. Without ending a life, Zaretha was quiet for a long moment, as her glowing eyes studied each human in turn, and finally, she spoke. She said there may be one alternative, but that it would require Jack to prove his worth and to demonstrate that humanity deserved the mercy she would show, and she paused before explaining that the armor required maintenance and ancient rituals that only the most skilled technicians in her empire could perform, and she said that if Jack could understand its workings and prove that his curiosity stemmed from genuine skill and not mere foolish impulse, then perhaps his life could be spared. Jack looked up with hope flickering in his eyes despite his terror, and he told her he would do it and that whatever she needed, he would do his best. Zaretha warned him that his best may not be sufficient but that they would see, and she told him that tomorrow he would be brought to the armory and that he would be given one chance to demonstrate his abilities, and she made it clear that if he failed, the sentence would be carried out. But if he succeeded, then perhaps they could speak of forgiveness. She gestured to her guards and ordered them to take the humans to the guest quarters and told them they were not to leave until tomorrow's test. As the humans were escorted away, Daniel caught one last glimpse of Queen Zaretha, and she stood motionless in the center of the chamber with her hand resting on her armor, and her expression unreadable, and the fate of their mission, and possibly of Jack's life, now hung in the balance. He told her that the repair was not just adequate but excellent, and that this human had skills that would be valued even among their own master craftsmen. Zaretha stepped forward and studied Jack with those intense, glowing eyes, and then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled, and it was a small smile but genuine. She told Jack that he had proven himself and that his curiosity was inappropriate, but that it stemmed from genuine skill and passion for his craft, and she said she could respect that, and she told him his life was spared and that more than that he had earned a measure of her respect. Jack nearly collapsed with relief and thanked her over and over. However, Zaretha continued as her voice took on a more serious tone, and she said that this incident had revealed something important, and that if they were to have successful relations between their peoples, there must be understanding on both sides. And she explained that humans must learn their ways, and perhaps they must learn to see human curiosity not as an insult, but as a different cultural approach to knowledge. Daniel saw his opportunity, and suggested that perhaps this could be the beginning of an exchange program, where their people could learn from hers, and hers from theirs. And he pointed out that Jack had shown that despite their differences, they could work together effectively. Zaretha considered this, and then nodded slowly, and said it was an interesting proposal, and told Daniel that they should return to the negotiation chamber because she believed they had much more to discuss, and perhaps this day's events had given them a better foundation for understanding than all the formal protocols they could have designed. As they left the armory, Daniel caught Jack's eye and gave him a subtle nod of approval, because what had started as a disaster had somehow transformed into an opportunity, but he knew this was just the beginning of a much larger story. The preparations for Queen Zaretha's visit to Earth had consumed 3 entire space stations and involved thousands of people across multiple nations, and Daniel stood in the command center of the newly constructed diplomatic complex in Geneva, watching the final checks being performed on everything from air quality to security protocols. He called out for a status report, and a chorus of responses came back from various stations confirming that everything was as ready as it could be. Beside him, Gregory looked nervous and said he still could not believe they were actually doing this with an alien queen visiting Earth, and he reminded Daniel that 6 months ago they did not even know the Valkyrians existed. Katie observed from her position at the security console that times changed quickly, and the question was whether they had changed quickly enough to handle this. The Eternal Dawn had entered Earth orbit 3 hours ago, and Queen Zaretha was scheduled to land in precisely 47 minutes, and the landing site had been prepared according to Valkyrian specifications, which had required some creative engineering to accommodate their different atmospheric preferences and energy requirements. Lisa Morgan was now something of a celebrity after her role in the bonding ceremony, and she was part of the greeting delegation, and so was Jack Murphy, though he seemed more interested in the technical aspects of the Valkyrian shuttle that would be bringing the Queen to the surface. Admiral Stevens called from UESA headquarters through Daniel's communicator and said the president wanted to know if they were ready. Daniel replied that they were as ready as they would ever be, and reported that the Queen's shuttle was beginning its descent now. The next few minutes felt like hours, and every eye in the command center was fixed on the display showing the shuttle's progress through Earth's atmosphere. And it was a beautiful craft that was sleek and elegant and left a trail of shimmering light as it descended. The shuttle landed perfectly in the center of the prepared zone, and for a long moment nothing happened. And then the boarding ramp extended, and Queen Zaretha emerged. She was even more impressive, against the backdrop of Earth's sky, and she had chosen to wear her sacred armor for this occasion, and it gleamed brilliantly in the sunlight. But she had also made a concession to human sensibilities because she wore a flowing cape of deep blue that was embroidered with symbols representing both Valkyrian and human cultures, and it was a gesture of unity that had been suggested by Lisa during one of their cultural exchange sessions. The greeting ceremony went flawlessly, and the president of the United Earth Space Alliance welcomed Zaretha with carefully practiced words that honored Valkyrian protocols while maintaining human dignity, and Zaretha responded with a speech that was both gracious and powerful, and she spoke of the potential for partnership between their peoples. But the real test came afterward during the cultural tour that had been arranged to show Zaretha various aspects of human civilization, and the schedule was ambitious with museums and universities and cultural centers and even a visit to a working farm to demonstrate human agriculture. At the Museum of Human History, Zaretha stood before an exhibit on human warfare and studied ancient weapons and armor with interest, and her fingers traced the air near a suit of medieval plate armor, not quite touching it but examining it carefully. She observed that their species had known much conflict, and that these artifacts spoke of both violence and artistry. Dr. Paul Henderson, who was the museum's director, nodded and said that humanity's history was complicated, and that they had fought countless wars but had also created great beauty and made remarkable progress toward peace. Zaretha turned to him and told him not to apologize for their warrior nature because the Valkyrian Empire was forged in war as well, and she said what mattered was not that they had known conflict but what they learned from it and what they chose to become. At Cambridge University, Zaretha attended a special symposium where human and Valkyrian scientists presented joint research findings, and the discoveries were remarkable with new approaches to energy generation that combined human innovation with Valkyrian harmonic principles and medical techniques that integrated both species' understanding of biology and even theoretical work on faster-than-light travel that neither species could have achieved alone. Jack was one of the presenters, and he explained his work with Master Kelvon on adaptive armor, technology, and as he spoke, Zaretha listened with evident approval. She said when the presentations concluded that this was what she had hoped to see, and that it was not humans trying to become Valkyrians, or Valkyrians trying to become human, but both species remaining true to themselves while learning to work together. And she declared this was the foundation of a real partnership. But the most significant moment came during an unscheduled stop, and as the royal procession passed through a public square. A small child broke away from her mother and ran towards Zaretha, holding up a drawing she had made. Security personnel moved to intercept, but Zaretha raised a hand to stop them, and she knelt down to the child's level, and her imposing armor somehow seemed less threatening in that moment. Zaretha asked gently what the little one had there. The girl, who was no more than 6 years old, held up her picture, and it showed a crude but enthusiastic drawing of a Valkyrian and a human, holding hands beneath a rainbow, and the girl explained that she had drawn Zaretha and her daddy because they were friends. Now Zaretha was quiet for a moment, and those who knew her well could see that she was deeply moved, and she asked if she could keep the drawing. The girl nodded eagerly and said she had made it for her. Zaretha carefully took the drawing and handled it as if it were as precious as the ancient artifacts in her own palace, and she thanked the girl and told her she would treasure it always. As she stood, she looked at Daniel and the other human leaders and told them that she had seen much that day, including their technology and their art and their history, but that this moment, with this innocent gesture from a child who saw not difference but possibility, told her more about humanity's potential than anything else could. That evening there was a formal state dinner attended by leaders from around the world, and Zaretha sat at the head table engaging in conversations that ranged from philosophy to practical matters of trade and cooperation. And Katie noticed that the Queen seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen her, and she was actually laughing at a joke told by the French ambassador. But there was one more test to come. And the following day, Zaretha had requested a private meeting with a select group that included Daniel and Katie, and Gregory and Jack and Lisa, and a few others who had been instrumental in the cultural exchange program. They met in a secure conference room, and Zaretha's demeanor was serious. She began by saying that she had spent 2 days among their people and had seen their achievements and their flaws and their potential and their limitations. And she had one question to ask them, and she wanted their honest answer about why they wanted this alliance and what they hoped to gain from partnership with the Valkyrian Empire. The room was silent for a moment, and then Daniel spoke. He told her that he could give her political answers about security and economic benefits, and that those things were true, but they were not the real reason. And he paused to gather his thoughts before explaining that humanity had spent its entire existence looking up at the stars and wondering if they were alone, and now they knew they were not. And the Valkyrian Empire represented not just an ally, but proof that the universe was bigger and more wonderful than they imagined. And he said they wanted this alliance because growing and learning alongside her people made them better than they could ever be alone. Katie added that they had learned that their differences made them stronger together, and that the Valkyrian approach to technology and philosophy and culture filled gaps in their own understanding. And from what they had seen, maybe their perspective offered something valuable to Valkyrians as well. Jack spoke up somewhat nervously and told the Queen that when he first touched her armor, it was the stupidest thing he had ever done, but it led him to Master Kelvin, and working with him had changed his entire understanding of what was possible, and he said he wanted this alliance because he wanted to keep learning and keep growing and keep discovering new ways of thinking and being, Lisa said simply, and with her usual enthusiasm that it was because getting to know people like Jaren and Myris and Thera had shown her that friendship and understanding could cross any boundary, and the universe felt less lonely when you knew there were others out there who could become family. Zaretha listened to each of them with her luminous eyes, thoughtful, and finally she stood. She told them that she came to Earth uncertain whether humanity was ready for true partnership with the Valkyrian Empire, and that they were young as a spacefaring species and impulsive and sometimes reckless, but that they were also brave and curious and capable of remarkable growth. And she said they learned from their mistakes and faced the unknown with hope rather than fear. She walked to the window looking out at the Earth below and told them she would recommend to her council that they proceed with a full alliance, not as superior and inferior, but as equals, with different strengths, and she said together they would explore the galaxy and defend against common threats and build something neither of their species could achieve alone. Zaretha turned back to them with a smile and told them she would insist that certain individuals be assigned to key positions in the joint programs. And she said Jack Murphy would continue working with Master Kelvin, and Lisa Morgan would serve as cultural liaison, and Captain Pierce and Lieutenant Brooks and Ambassador Hall would coordinate the military and diplomatic aspects, and she told them they had earned this through their dedication and their willingness to see beyond their own perspectives. The relief and joy in the room were palpable, but Zaretha held up a hand. She said, however, that this was only the beginning and that the real work started now, and she warned there would be challenges ahead with cultural clashes and disagreements, and moments when the alliance would be tested, and she told them the question was whether they had the commitment to work through those difficulties. Daniel stepped forward and assured her that humanity was committed, and that they understood this was a partnership that would require constant effort and mutual respect, and he said they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Zaretha nodded approvingly and said there was one more thing she wanted to address, and she called Jack. Forward Jack approached nervously, unsure what to expect. The Queen told him that his mistake 3 weeks ago in touching her armor without permission had nearly caused a war between their peoples, but that his skill and dedication in repairing it had opened a door to understanding, and she said she had been thinking about this a great deal and had come to a decision. She removed a small crystalline device from her belt and held it out to Jack, and she explained that this was a royal commendation, which was the highest honor the Valkyrian Empire could bestow upon a non-Valkyrian, and that it granted him the status of honorary master craftsman and the right to work on sacred artifacts throughout her empire. Jack was speechless, and his hands trembled, As he accepted the device, and he managed to say that he did not know what to say, and that he was honored beyond words, Zaretha told him that his curiosity had been the spark that ignited this alliance, and that while curiosity without respect was dangerous, curiosity combined with genuine skill and humility was the foundation of all progress, and she said he embodied the best qualities of his species. Katie felt tears in her eyes as she watched the exchange, because just weeks ago they had all feared Jack would be executed, and now he was being honored by an alien queen. The formal meeting concluded, and Zaretha announced she would be departing the following morning, but that she was leaving behind a permanent diplomatic mission and that the real work of building the alliance would begin immediately. That evening there was a farewell celebration that was much less formal than the state dinner, and it was held in the observation deck of the diplomatic complex, where both humans and Valkyrians mingled freely and shared food and stories and laughter. Gregory found himself in conversation with Thera and several other Valkyrian cultural officers, and they were discussing the challenges of translation and how certain concepts simply did not exist in the other's language. Thera explained that Valkyrians had 17 different words for what humans simply called friendship, and each one described a different depth and type of connection, and she said it made diplomatic discussions complicated sometimes because nuance was so important in her culture. Gregory laughed and told her that humans had similar issues with words like love, which could mean anything from enjoying a food to being willing to die for someone, and he said language was always imperfect, but the effort to understand each other was what mattered. Katie stood near the window watching Earth rotate slowly below, and Lisa joined her with a glass of something blue that the Valkyrians had brought. And Katie asked how it tasted. Lisa made a face and said it was interesting and definitely an acquired taste, but that Jaren had insisted she try it because it was traditional at celebrations, and she was not going to refuse. Katie smiled and told Lisa she had come a long way from the enthusiastic young cartographer who had accidentally agreed to be a witness at an alien wedding. Lisa laughed and said she had learned that enthusiasm needed to be balanced with understanding, but that she would not change her approach because genuine interest and curiosity had opened so many doors, and she said the key was pairing that curiosity with respect and willingness to learn. Across the room, Jack was surrounded by a group of human engineers who were asking him endless questions about Valkyrian technology, and Master Kelvin watched from nearby with obvious amusement. One of the engineers asked Jack if it was true that Valkyrian ships could achieve 0.97 light speed. Jack nodded and explained that it was not just about raw power, but about understanding energy harmonics and working with the natural frequencies of space-time, rather than fighting against them. And he said it was a completely different paradigm from human engineering. Another engineer asked when they would get access to that technology. Jack held up his hands and told them to slow down because this was a partnership, not a shopping trip, and he explained that the Valkyrians would share their knowledge, but humans had to be ready to receive it, and more importantly, they had to have something to offer in return. Kelvin approached and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder and told the group that young Jack spoke wisdom and that true exchange required both giving and receiving, and that humans had much to teach Valkyrians as well, particularly in areas of adaptive thinking and creative problem-solving. The celebration continued late into the night, and by the time it ended, new friendships had formed, and old ones had deepened, and the foundation of the alliance felt stronger than ever. The next morning, Daniel stood with the official delegation as they bid farewell to Queen Zaretha, and her shuttle sat gleaming in the early sunlight ready to carry. Her back to the eternal dawn, Zaretha addressed the assembled crowd and told them that she had come to Earth with curiosity and caution, unsure what she would find, but that she was leaving with hope and confidence in the future of their partnership. And she said the humans had shown her that despite their youth as a spacefaring civilization, they possessed the wisdom and courage necessary for true alliance. She looked directly at Daniel and told him that the responsibility now rested with both their peoples to nurture this alliance and help it grow. And she said there would be difficulties and setbacks, but if they faced them with the same spirit of cooperation and mutual respect they had shown these past weeks, then nothing could stop them. Daniel saluted and promised that humanity would honor the trust she had placed in them. As Zaretha boarded her shuttle, she paused and turned back one more time, and she pulled out the drawing that the little girl had given her and held it up for everyone to see. And she said this simple picture from a child who saw only friendship and possibility would hang in her palace as a reminder of what they were building together. The shuttle lifted off smoothly and rose into the sky, trailing light behind it, and the assembled humans watched until it disappeared from view. Katie turned to Daniel and said they had actually done it, and that they had formed an alliance with an advanced alien civilization. Daniel nodded, but reminded her that forming the alliance was just the first step, and that now came the hard work of maintaining it and growing it and making it into something that would benefit both species for generations to come. Gregory joined them and said he had already received word that the Valkyrian Council had unanimously approved the alliance and that formal treaties would be signed within the month, and he added that there would be expanded exchange programs and joint research initiatives and even talk of establishing a combined fleet for exploration and defense. Lisa ran up excited and told them that Jaren had just informed her that she was being invited to visit the Valkyrian homeworld as an official cultural ambassador, and she asked if she could go. Daniel smiled and told her that was exactly the kind of opportunity they needed to pursue, and that she should absolutely go. Jack approached more quietly and told Daniel that Master Kelvon had offered to take him as a permanent apprentice, which would require him to spend at least 2 years aboard the Eternal Dawn, and he asked if that would be acceptable. Daniel looked at the young man who had grown so much in such a short time and told him that it would be more than acceptable and that it would be an honor, and he said Jack would be representing the best of humanity. As the group stood together, looking up at the sky where the Eternal Dawn orbited somewhere beyond their sight, Katie said that everything had changed because a curious engineer had made a stupid mistake and touched something he should not have. Jack laughed ruefully and agreed, but said that sometimes the best things came from mistakes and that the key was learning from them and making them into opportunities. Daniel put his hand on Jack's shoulder and told him that he had not just made a mistake into an opportunity but had helped forge an alliance that would change the course of human history, and he said that was something to be proud of. The sun rose higher over Geneva and a new day began for humanity, and somewhere in orbit the Valkyrians prepared for their journey home, knowing that they were no longer alone in the galaxy but had found partners and friends among the stars. The alliance between humans and Valkyrians had begun with a roar of anger over touched armor, but it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, in the future stretched out before both species, filled with infinite possibility and the promise of discovery and friendship that would span the stars. Daniel looked at his team and the Valkyrian delegates who remained behind, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as true partners, and that made all the difference in the universe.